They say that money has a smell. In my experience, it smells like old copper and fresh ink. But here, in the private tasting room of the Obsidian Manor, wealth smelled entirely different. It smelled of aggressive truffle oil, chilled champagne, and the suffocating, dusty scent of crushed velvet drapes that hadn't been properly aired since the turn of the century. The room was designed to intimidate, a cavern of dark wood and low lighting, illuminated only by the fracture of light through a crystal chandelier that hung above us like a suspended guillotine. I sat in the corner, a ghost at my own feast. My hands rested on the cool, pebbled leather of a 3-ring binder. It was a heavy thing, dense with paper, receipts, invoices, vendor contracts. I could feel the texture of the plastic sheet protectors against my fingertips, slick and cold. Inside were the tangible proofs of my love, or perhaps my foolishness. The catering deposit, the floral arrangements, white orchids imported from Ecuador specifically requested to match the bride's vision, the venue fee, the orchestra, the thousands of dollars in line items that I had meticulously organized, categorized, and paid for. Across the table, the atmosphere was electric, manic. My son David and his fiancée Jessica were huddled together with the wedding planner, a woman with a smile so tight it looked painful. They were laughing, a sharp clinking sound that bounced off the crystal glassware. Jessica was in her element. She was a creature of sharp angles and high gloss, manicured to a weaponized perfection. Her nails were long, painted a blood-red lacquer, and they tapped rhythmically against the rim of her champagne flute. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a predator testing the strength of a cage. David looked tired, or maybe just diminished. He sat slightly behind her, nodding at her commands, his eyes glazing over as she debated the merits of silk napkins versus linen. He didn't look at me. He hadn't looked at me since we arrived. I remained silent. In my 60 years, I have learned that silence is often mistaken for weakness, or worse, for senility. They thought I was simply the old woman in the corner, the purse strings, the silent financier. They didn't know I was cataloging everything. The way the light caught the diamond on Jessica's finger, a ring I had helped David select, a ring paid for with the dividends of stocks my late husband had left me. The way the wedding planner glanced at her watch, clearly bored but trapped by the commission. Then, the shift happened. The air in the room changed, growing heavier, colder. Jessica stopped laughing. She picked up a silver spoon and tapped her glass, a high-pitched ping that cut through the low hum of the ventilation system. She didn't need to do that. There were only 4 of us in the room. It was a performance. "David and I have been talking, Martha," she began. Her voice was smooth, like syrup poured over crushed glass. She turned her body away from the planner and finally acknowledged my existence. She gestured vaguely toward the large easel displaying the seating chart, a complex diagram of social hierarchy that she had been agonizing over for months. She took a sip of her champagne, leaving a red lipstick stain on the rim. She looked at me, not with anger, but with a pitying sneer that was infinitely worse. "The aesthetic for the wedding is modern elite," she said, articulating the capital letters. "It's very specific, curated, and let's be honest. Your vibe is a bit dusty antique. It just doesn't fit the photos. We think it's best if you don't attend the ceremony or the reception." The words hung in the air, suspended in the scent of truffles and old dust. Dusty antique. I felt a physical sensation in my chest, a tightening like a fist close in around my heart. But my face remained impassive. I didn't blink. I slowly turned my gaze to my son. my beautiful boy whom I had carried, raised, and educated, whom I had bailed out of trouble more times than I cared to count in this ledger. "David?" I asked, my voice steady, barely a whisper. He didn't look up. He found the pattern of the Persian rug suddenly fascinating. He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous tic he had carried since childhood. "It's Jessica's day, Mom," he muttered, addressing his shoes. "We just want it to be perfect. The aesthetic is rigid. You understand. You understand." The phrase echoed in my mind. I looked down at my purse sitting on the floor beside my chair. Inside the front pocket, tucked into a crisp white envelope, was a cashier's check. It was dated for today. The amount was written in bold, uncompromising numbers, $75,000. It was the final payment to the Obsidian Manor, due upon the conclusion of this tasting. Without it, the modern elite wedding would be nothing more than a canceled reservation. I felt the weight of the check through the leather of my bag. It felt heavy. It felt like leverage. A scream rose in my throat, a primal sound of betrayal and grief, but I swallowed it down. I pushed it deep into the pit of my stomach where it could burn quietly. To them, I was not a mother. I was an ATM with a pulse. I was a resource to be mined until the vein ran dry and then discarded because the machinery was too loud, too old, too dusty for the scenery. I took a breath. I could taste the metallic tang of the betrayal. Slowly, deliberately, I closed the binder. The snap of the rings was loud in the silence. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. I picked up my purse, feeling the outline of the envelope against my hip. "I understand perfectly, Jessica," I said. My tone was mild, pleasant even. "If I'm not a guest, I shouldn't be here." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors. My heels clicked on the parquet floor, a steady, rhythmic departure. Behind me, I heard Jessica let out a breathless, triumphant laugh. "Finally," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "The air is clearer." I paused with my hand on the brass doorknob. The metal was cold under my palm. I looked back one last time, not at them, but at the room, the opulence I was expected to pay for. I tightened my grip on my purse, feeling the sharp edge of the cashier's check through the leather. They thought the air was clearer because the dusty antique was leaving. They had no idea that the antique was taking the foundation of their perfect day with her. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, leaving them alone with their champagne and a bill they couldn't pay. But as I walked down the corridor, I wondered, how long would it take for the phone to ring once the venue manager asked for the check? The interior of my Mercedes was a sanctuary of silence. The heavy doors thudded shut, sealing out the damp, gray afternoon and the looming facade of the Obsidian Manor. I sat there for a long moment, the engine idling with a low, steady vibration that hummed through the leather seat and up my spine. My hands were gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white, not from rage, but from a sudden, crystalline clarity. I looked down at the passenger seat. There it lay, innocent and deadly, the cashier's check. I picked it up. The paper was cool and crisp, the watermark catching the dull light filtering through the windshield. Pay to the Order of Obsidian Manor. The sum was typed in severe, uncompromising black ink, 75,000 dollars. It was a fortune. It was a down payment on a house. It was a college education. To Jessica, it was merely the cost of admission to her modern elite fantasy, a fantasy that had no room for the woman funding it. I reached into my purse and retrieved my phone. My fingers, usually shaking slightly with the tremors of age, were steady now, cold, precise. I opened my banking app. the blue light of the screen illuminating the deepening shadows of the car. I scrolled back through the last 6 months of history. It was a hemorrhage of capital. October 14th, deposit Obsidian Manor, $20,000. November 2nd, gilded petals. Floristry, $8,000. November 15th, the Midnight Orchestra, $5,000. December 1st, custom linens import, $3,200. Each line item was a slash against my retirement account, the nest egg my husband Arthur had worked 40 years to build. We'd save this for travel, for security, for our twilight years. Now it was being funneled into a single day of narcissism for a woman who thought I was dusty. I closed the app and opened my email, searching for the keyword contract. There it was, the PDF attachment from the venue. I zoomed in on the signature page. I remembered that day clearly. David had forgotten his ID and Jessica had been too stressed to deal with the paperwork. "You sign it, Mom," David had said. "It's all the same family, right?" I stared at the digital signature on the screen, Martha J. Sterling. Below it, the designation was clear, client. A dry, humorless smile touched my lips. They had forgotten the most basic rule of business, one Arthur had taught me decades ago. He who signs the contract holds the power. I wasn't just the financier. Legally, I was the host. I was the client. The wedding wasn't David and Jessica's event hosted at the manor. It was my event, for which I was permitting them to be the guests of honor. And the host had just been ejected from the premises. I put the car in gear. I didn't turn toward the highway that led to my empty, quiet house. Instead, I turned toward downtown. 20 minutes later, I walked into the First National Bank. The air conditioning was set to a preservationist chill, smelling of carpet cleaner and old money. It was a stark contrast to the cloying perfume of the tasting room. Here things were ordered, logical, transactional. "Mrs. Sterling," a voice called out. Mr. Henderson, the branch manager, hurried over from his glass-walled office. He was a man of suspenders and distinct nervous energy, always eager to please his high-value account holders. "We weren't expecting you today. Is everything all right with the cashier's check? Did the venue receive it?" "Not exactly, Robert," I said, my voice smooth and calm. I sat in the leather chair opposite his desk, placing the check on the polished mahogany surface. There's been a change of plans. Breach of agreement, you might say. Mr. Henderson looked at the check, then at me. He saw the resolve in my eyes. "I see. What would you like to do?" "First," I said, sliding the check toward him, "I need to issue a stop payment order on this immediately. Redeposit the funds into my primary savings." "Consider it done," he said, typing rapidly. The sound of his keyboard was rhythmic, soothing. "Second," I continued, pulling a printed copy of the venue contract from my bag. I always carried hard copies. "I need to make a phone call. May I use your landline? I prefer a recorded line for legal purposes." Henderson blinked, then nodded, sliding his desk phone toward me. I dialed the number for the owner of the Obsidian Manor. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Blackwood," I said, "this is Martha Sterling, regarding the event scheduled for the 24th. "Ah, Mrs. Sterling, we were just finalizing the menu with the happy couple. Is the check on its way?" "No, Mr. Blackwood. I am calling to formally invoke the cancellation clause of our contract. As the signatory and sole client, I am terminating the event effective immediately." There was a stunned silence on the other end. Mrs. Sterling? "You can't be serious. It's 2 weeks away. The cancellation fees are detailed in Section 4, Paragraph B," I interrupted, my voice devoid of emotion. "I am willing to forfeit the initial deposit. However, the $75,000 balance will not be transferred." Furthermore, as I have been explicitly barred from the premises by the beneficiaries of the event, I consider the contract voided due to constructive exclusion of the host. You will receive a formal letter from my attorney by morning. Good day." I hung up the phone. The receiver clicked into the cradle with a finality that echoed in the quiet office. Mr. Henderson was staring at me, his mouth slightly open. "One last thing, Robert," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt just as I had done at the manor. "The joint checking account I share with David, the one linked to the wedding expenses credit card?" "Yes?" "Flag it for fraud," I commanded softly. "Any charges attempted by Jessica or David from this moment forward are unauthorized. Freeze it. If they try to buy so much as a pack of gum, I want the card declined." "Mrs. Sterling," Henderson whispered, "that will leave them effectively stranded." I picked up my purse. I thought of Jessica's sneer. I thought of David staring at his shoes while his mother was humiliated. "They wanted a modern elite wedding, Robert," I said, walking toward the door. "Let's see how elite they are on a beer budget." I stepped out into the afternoon sun. The air felt cleaner now, but as I reached for my car door, my phone buzzed in my hand. Then again, then a third time. I looked down at the screen. It wasn't David. It was a notification from the bank app. "Transaction declined, the Obsidian Manor, $75,000. The war had officially begun. Gardening, much like finance, is an exercise in calculated cruelty. To ensure the health of the whole, one must be willing to sever the parts that are rotting. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, a Tuesday. The air in my backyard was crisp, smelling of damp earth and the mulch I had laid down the previous week. I was kneeling on my foam pad wearing my heavy, thorn-proof canvas gloves. In my hand, I held a pair of Japanese steel bypass pruners. They were sharp enough to slice through bone, but today they were reserved for the peace roses. The bush had been neglected, much like other aspects of my life. It was overgrown, choked with deadwood and suckers that were sapping the energy from the main canes. I reached in, finding a gray, brittle stem that showed no sign of life. Snick. The sound was satisfyingly dry. The dead wood fell to the dirt. On the wrought iron patio table behind me, my phone began to vibrate. It wasn't a ring. I had silenced the ringer hours ago. It was a low, aggressive bzzzt that rattled the glass tabletop. I didn't turn around. I knew who it was. "Snick." Another dead stem fell. The buzzing stopped for 3 seconds, then started again. Urgent, relentless. It was the digital heartbeat of a crisis. First, it had been the wedding planner, leaving 3 voicemails that escalated from confused to hysterical. Then came the emails from the bank, automated notifications of attempted charges. Declined, declined, declined. And now, inevitably, the family. I carefully selected a cane that was crossing another, causing friction. Rubbing the wrong way, I thought, snip. The peace of the morning was shattered not by the phone, but by the screech of tires in the driveway. It was followed by the heavy slam of car doors, 1, then 2. Footsteps pounded against the pavement, running around the side of the house toward the garden gate. The wooden latch clattered violently as the gate was thrown open, hitting the fence with a splintering crack. "Mom!" David's voice was a ragged shout. I continued to inspect a leaf for aphids. "Martha, where are you?" That was Jessica. Her voice, usually a carefully modulated purr, was now a jagged shriek. I stood up slowly, brushing a smudge of potting soil from my apron. I turned to face them. They were a ruin. David was red-faced, sweating through his polo shirt, his hair sticking up in tufts as if he had been pulling at it. But Jessica was a masterpiece of destruction. She was wearing designer yoga pants and a crop top, but her face was a mask of panic. Her mascara, usually waterproof, had surrendered to the sheer volume of her tears, creating dark, frantic streaks down her cheeks. Her hands were shaking. "You!" Jessica gasped, pointing a manicured finger at me. You senile witch!" I raised an eyebrow. "Good morning, Jessica. You're trespassing." "The venue called," she screamed, stepping onto the grass, her heels sinking into the soft earth. "Mr. Blackwood called us. He said the event is canceled. He said the contract is void. They're locking the doors, Martha. They're turning away the florists." David rushed forward, stopping just short of the rose bush. "Mom, what did you do? The bank cards aren't working. The joint account is frozen. We tried to pay the caterer the final deposit and the card was declined for fraud." "Fraud, Mom? Do you have any idea what's happening?" I looked at my son. He looked like a frightened child who had broken a window and was waiting for the punishment. But he wasn't a child. He was a 30-year-old man who had watched his fiancée humiliate his mother and had said nothing. "I have a very clear idea of what is happening, David," I said, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with their hysteria. "I am pruning the dead wood." "This isn't a metaphor," Jessica yelled, stomping her foot. "This is my wedding. The invites are out. The Instagram countdown is at 14 days. We have 300 guests flying in. We will be humiliated." "Humiliation is a powerful teacher," I observed. "I learned a great deal about it yesterday afternoon." "You can't do this," David pleaded, his voice cracking. "You signed the contract. You promised." I looked down at my pruners, testing the spring mechanism. "I signed a contract as a client, David. A client hosts an event. Yesterday, Jessica made it very clear that I am not a guest. If I am not a guest, I cannot be the host. And if I am not the host, there is no payment. The venue requires payment from the contracting party. Since that party has been excluded, the contract effectively dissolves." I looked up, locking eyes with Jessica. "It's a legal principle called frustration of purpose. You might want to look it up, assuming you can afford the data plan." Jessica's mouth opened and closed, fish-like. The cruelty of the situation was dawning on her. She wasn't fighting a confused old woman. She was fighting the bank. "But the money," she whispered. "The $75,000. "It's safe," I assured her. "In my account, where it belongs." "You have to fix this," she hissed, stepping closer, her eyes narrowing. "You have to call them back. Right now, or I swear to God, David will never speak to you again." She looked at David for confirmation. He hesitated. He looked at his mother, standing amidst her roses, holding the shears. Then he looked at Jessica, a mess of entitlement and rage. I didn't wait for him to choose. I delivered the mercy kill. I pulled off one glove, slowly, finger by finger. I dusted the dirt from the canvas. "You said I didn't fit the aesthetic, Jessica," I said softly. "You wanted modern elite. You wanted picture perfect. Well, I'm simply ensuring the wedding matches your true aesthetic." I took a step closer to her, smelling the sour scent of her panic. Empty, cheap, and fraudulent. The silence that followed was heavier than the screaming. It pressed down on the garden, suffocating the birdsong. Jessica stared at me, her face draining of color, the insult landing like a physical blow. But it was David who caught my attention. He looked from Jessica to me, and for the first time in years, the fog in his eyes seemed to clear. He looked at the woman he was about to marry, shrieking, selfish, cruel, and then at the mother he had betrayed. The realization washed over him, cold and absolute. He had backed the wrong horse, And now the race was over. "Mom," David whispered, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. I turned my back on them and knelt down to the rose bush. "Please close the gate on your way out," I said, positioning the shears around another dead stem. "I have a lot of work to do." I heard the crunch of gravel as they retreated, but I didn't look up. I waited until the car engine faded into the distance. Then I pulled my phone from the table. There was one more call I needed to make. Not to the venue, but to my lawyer. Because if I knew Jessica, this wasn't the end. It was just the opening statement. They say that rain on your wedding day is good luck. It is a charming superstition invented to comfort brides whose perfect days have been ruined by the indifference of the atmosphere. In the case of David and Jessica, the rain did not bring luck. It brought a reckoning. I did not attend the nuptials, of course. I was otherwise engaged, drinking a very expensive vintage Bordeaux in my dry, warm living room, reading a book. But the digital age allows for no secrets, and certainly no privacy. The photos surfaced on social media almost immediately, a train wreck documented in high definition. The modern elite aesthetic, stripped of the Obsidian Manor's infrastructure and my $75,000, had been hastily relocated to the backyard of Jessica's parents' house in the suburbs. It was a modest plot of land, prone to flooding, and on that particular Saturday, the heavens opened up with a biblical fury. The photos told a story of tragic comedy. I zoomed in on the details with the same forensic detachment I had applied to their budget. There were no crystal chandeliers. Instead, strings of damp patio lights drooped between trees, one of them flickering ominously in a video clip. There were no velvet drapes. There was a rented white tent that seemed to be buckling under the weight of the downpour, water cascading down the sides and pooling around the guests' feet, and the chairs, those white plastic garden chairs that are the hallmark of a barbecue, not a coronation. In one photo, the legs of the chairs were sinking slowly into the saturated lawn, trapping the guests in a muddy embrace. Jessica's dress, a garment she had claimed cost more than my car, was stained brown at the hem, soaking up the dirty water like a sponge. Her smile in the photos was brittle, a rictus of suppressed rage, while David looked like a man waking up from a long coma to find himself in a nightmare. It was, by all accounts, a disaster. The aftermath was predictable. Financial stress is the universal solvent. It dissolves the weak glue of superficial relationships faster than any affair. Without the buffer of my money covering their lifestyle, the cracks in their foundation didn't just show, they shattered. The breakdown happened in slow motion over 8 weeks. I heard the details through the grapevine of family gossip. Apparently, the modern elite lifestyle is difficult to maintain when you are paying off credit card debt from a rained-out party. The argument started over grocery bills and escalated to rent. Jessica, realizing that David came without the trust fund she had hallucinated, lost interest with remarkable speed. 2 months after the muddy vows, David moved out. He is currently residing in a studio apartment above a garage, a place that smells of damp drywall and regret. Jessica, resilient as a cockroach, didn't mourn long. She was seen last week on the arm of a man who leases a BMW and wears too much cologne. She found a new host. As for the $75,000, I decided that if the money was destined to be spent on a once-in-a-lifetime experience, I should ensure the recipient actually appreciated it. I'm currently writing this from the private teak deck of the SS Sovereign. The air here is different. It doesn't smell of rain or mud or desperation. It smells of salt spray, solar warmth, and freedom. The ocean stretches out before me, a vast undulating sheet of sapphire that separates me from the noise of the land. The steward, a charming young man named Leo, just refilled my mimosa. He didn't ask for a credit card. He didn't ask if I fit the aesthetic. He simply smiled and ensured the crystal flute was chilled to perfection. I have spent the last 3 weeks watching the sun rise over the Mediterranean. I have walked through the ruins of Pompeii, a city destroyed by a sudden catastrophe, much like my son's marriage. I have eaten pasta in Tuscany and bought silk in Istanbul. The check that was meant to pay for Jessica's 3 hours of vanity has funded 3 months of my liberation. My phone, resting on the small table beside my deck chair, buzzed. I picked it up, sliding my sunglasses down the bridge of my nose. It was a text message. The name on the screen was simply David. "Hey, Mom, I know things are weird, but the deposit for the new place was steep, and they're asking for first and last month's rent. I'm a little short. Could you maybe help me out, just this once? I promise I'll pay you back." I stared at the words. The audacity was almost impressive. Even now, after everything, he still saw me as the safety net. He still believed that his failures were my emergencies. He thought that time and distance would soften the Iron Lady, that the mother in me would override the accountant. He was wrong. I looked out at the horizon, where the blue of the sea met the blue of the sky in a perfect, seamless line. I took a sip of my mimosa, the bubbles bursting sharply on my tongue. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt the profound, peaceful silence of a closed ledger. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't type a reply. I didn't lecture him about responsibility or remind him of the day he watched his fiancée humiliate me. Explanations are for people who matter. Instead, I pressed delete. Then I went to the contact settings and selected block caller. I placed the phone face down on the table. "I'm sorry, David," I whispered to the vast, indifferent ocean. "You aren't invited." Secrets have a way of surfacing, don't they? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my channel. I have many more locked away in this library, waiting for you.